Cathedral thinking and strategic innovation are two entirely different topics, and they go together very nicely when you think about it. Cathedral thinking is thinking big picture and very long term. The kind of thinking that an architect or a master builder needed to have in the 13th or 12th or 11th century in order to be able to conceptualize something that that person would never see finished. It's thinking beyond one's lifetime, thinking something grand and masterful. Strategic innovation is something that very often happens within the notion or the exercise of cathedral thinking. Very often, because this is going to be beyond our lifetime, we need to be innovating as we go along. There's no way to conceive of some of the things that we might have to address. And so when we hit a roadblock, when we hit a challenge, the strategic innovation, it will be something that we can draw on to innovate, thinking outside the box, thinking about things that have never been done to solve this kind of problem, because that problem never existed before. Cathedral thinking requires a number of very important components. It requires very long-term thinking, thinking possibly beyond one's lifetime, and not getting attached to the result, which is a very un-Western concept, because the results will be day to day and not necessarily completion within a lifetime. It requires enrolling other people in the notion of the vision. No master builder could ever build a cathedral by himself or herself. So it requires enrolling other people. It requires being evolutionary or revolutionary, depending on how you want to look at it, but evolutionary in the sense that we have to evolve with changing conditions. And it involves remembering that we have all the day-to-day things that we have to deal with that are going to be ongoing for the length of the exercise to realize the vision. Well, I think somebody looked in history and said, what did it take for somebody to conceive of something hugely important in that community? What kinds of thought needed to go into that, what kinds of planning could go into it, and what kinds of adaptations needed to occur while it was being exercised. Many cathedrals took hundreds of years to build, and they went through many different changes within the community and the larger, I guess, culture. So an example of that is the church or the Cathedral of Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. That was designed by a Spanish architect named Antonio Gaudí, who was a Catalan Spaniard, and he created something that's never existed before, either in terms of its design or in terms of its structure. He started thinking about that when he was about 30 and continued on with the building of it for the next 40 plus years. In order to do that, he needed to be thinking about what's it going to be like to build where we're going to build. What kind of foundations do we need to create? And what kinds of things might we come up with that we've never dealt with before? The cathedral now has been underway since 1882, so that's about 130 years. It's about 40 to 50 years away from being finished. So Antonio Gaudí died in 1926, and he was a long way from ever being near the completion of the cathedral. In the meantime, there have been 2 world wars. There was the Spanish Civil War. There have been other wars all around the world. There have been many incredible inventions like space travel and the telephone and television and the internet. And all of those things have happened while this cathedral is underway. If we look at the picture of the cathedral at its stage when he passed away, it's nothing compared to what it is now, and it's still 40 to 50 years away from being finished. So Antonio Gaudi needed to imagine something that had never existed in terms of the way he designed it. He was he had a very unusual approach to design, and he created systems, technologies. While he was doing that design, for example, structural systems that had never existed before. And he did that by innovating in a strategic way. He actually made models of his cathedral and turned them upside down and hung weights from them in order to figure out how strong the structural members inside the cathedral needed to be. Nobody had ever done that before, and nobody had ever conceived of that way of designing structure. It was usually based on older technologies, wood structures turned into stone structures, and stone structures turned into steel structures, and so we're familiar with all of that. And then he turned it all upside down and did something different. Many different kinds of innovations in terms of thinking, in terms of imagining, and in terms of letting go. One major innovation is letting go of ego and realizing it's not about him. It was about something bigger and more important than him, and leaving a legacy for humankind. That's what cathedral thinking is. Well, I think that's the key question, is how do I communicate something that is bigger and beyond me, so that other people can understand it in concept and decide whether they want to participate or not. At the same time as realizing, if it's a big long-term vision, that there will be things that we can't even conceive that we're going to have to deal with, and it'll be left up to the people at the time, whether it was the initiator or other people much later, to figure out how to deal with it. Looking at another example of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, they built second walls above the main part of the interior of the cathedral that hid flying buttresses, and that had never been done before, and that was an innovation. So I think we can't plan for innovation. We can plan to innovate and be ready for that. And it takes a certain approach and a certain willingness to incorporate the visions of other people in order for that to happen. So again, we don't know what's going to happen. It could be that looking at other cathedrals, or for example, not a cathedral, but the Leaning Tower of Pisa, much older than the cathedral in Barcelona, when they started building it, it immediately started to sink. So they decided to change the direction that they were building in, and instead of building directly on the tower as it was constructed, they changed the direction of the building. That was an innovation. Nobody had ever done that before. It didn't happen to work very well, but it still was an innovation. So I think there are attitudes that we can approach this way of doing things with. One attitude is that there are no barriers. There are no blocks. There's simply an opportunity then. It's a time to innovate. It's a time to invent. It's a time to think way outside the box and do things that haven't been done before, because now it's time. And so there might be an invention of a new system to do something. There might be an invention of a new process to do something. There might be inventions of new products that have never been created before. And so all of these things, if we think about space travel and all the things that have come from space travel, there's another example of constant innovation and to realize a vision, to realize what somebody conceived of. Well, I think the first thing it takes is getting out of our own way and allowing ourselves to imagine. Imagine big. I recently did some work in a unionized environment with a very large international construction company and a large international union. And I asked them to consider, they were in the bargaining process, I asked them to consider what would it be like for them to bargain as if they were on the same team, as contrasted with bargaining as if they were on opposite teams. And that notion all by itself thinking we're working together created a dramatic change in how they work together. So it's getting out of our way and not relying on convention. It's remembering that if we're going to start on something big, we may not see results for a long time. And it's not about us or our ego, it's about leaving a legacy for people coming after us so that they can benefit from what we embarked on. It's imagining doing things that have never been done before. In other words, doing the undoable. It draws on a concept from Stephen Covey, which is begin with the end in mind. A lot of people, I think, begin with the beginning in mind, and or the middle, or somewhere else. And so if we imagine, again, back to the analogy or the metaphor of cathedral, what could this be? What are all the things that this could contribute to this community? And then how do we start on that process and be adaptable and evolutionary as it occurs? Another notion is that it takes drawing on unusual sources for inspiration, as opposed to the conventional sources, going to the internet now, which is convention, or talking to the experts. There may be sources that we have never considered that are unconventional and can give us inspiration for how to do these things. And I think it's finally always hanging on to the vision and being able to communicate that, or choosing to communicate that in a way that draws other people in and in a way that inspires them to contribute.